Season 2022-23 was a thoroughly entertaining season of football, a rollercoaster of emotions for plenty of teams. My name is Lockie, this is Coastward Football. Let's rate every A-League team's 2022-23 campaign. Starting off in last place, MACARTHUR FC. I've gone for 4 out of 10, which might come as a bit of surprise. I think something that bumps up MACARTHUR's rating for me just a little bit is that Australia Cup win, which feels like an eternity ago now when you think, Dwight York coming in the off-season. They had a great cup run all the way to the end. They're winning the trophy. And it was exciting times at MACARTHUR FC. They've got fantastic players in Ulysses De Villa. Daniel Arzani was back at the club. But ultimately, the wheels came off about halfway through the season. Dwight York leaving, Miles Stajowski coming in to take over. And they really struggled for the second half of the campaign to find any sort of momentum. Ulysses De Villa going down with injury, Arzani going down with injury. Their lineup was chopping and changing, and they became, the last place team, and I think rightly so, come the end of their campaign. They were really, really poor to finish off. 4 out of 10, though, I think, considering the injuries that they had, it's not too much of a surprise, but it is quite rare, to see in the same season a club win the domestic, win the cup, and then go on to pick up the wooden spoon is quite a surprise. So I'm going 4 out of 10 for MACARTHUR FC. Overall, quite a poor campaign, of course. Coming in at second last on the ladder, we had Melbourne Victory, and for them, I'm giving them a 3 out of 10. I think when you compare Melbourne Victory and MACARTHUR squads on paper, Victory by far have a better squad. They were coming off a really solid season. The campaign before, winning the Australia Cup with Tony Popovic. They made it through just one game away from the grand final. They had a fantastic season. And, Nani coming into the side, you were expecting them to be right up there once again. Some of them even predicting them to finish top of the table. And they finished second last at many times after the end of many rounds, sitting bottom of the ladder with the same coach, with overall the same group of players they had the year before. It was just an absolute shock. No one saw it coming, and it's simply unacceptable. That's the word when it comes to this sort of situation. It's unacceptable for a club of this size, for me, the biggest club in Australian football, to be finishing this low with such a fantastic coach and a group of players. A real shock. So for me, that's why they get a rating just below MACARTHUR for me. 3 out of 10 for Melbourne Victory. Newcastle Jets had another disappointing season, finishing outside finals. Finished 10th this year, and it's going to be interesting to see what they do to turn around next season. Of course, without Arthur Papas, who was recently announced he has left the Jets. I'm going for a 4 out of 10 for the Hunter Club. I think once again they just really struggled to excite. At times throughout the season they had a couple decent wins, but just consistency, that was the thing that really let Newcastle down. They would have a decent performance one week, winning 3 or 4-0, and the next week they'd back it up with a loss. They struggled so much at the back as well, defensively, conceding goals. Losing Daniel Pena was massive for Newcastle Jets. They really struggled to sort of replace Pena. They brought in Reno Piscopo, but he was struggling with injuries and consistency. It's always exciting for Newcastle Jets. They always build such an exciting team with good players, but for me, a really disappointing season for Newcastle Jets. 4 out of 10. Finishing in 9th place was Perth Glory, and for them, a bit of a surprise maybe, but I'm going for a 6 out of 10. Bit of a jump up here, and this is because they were coming off, for me, what was arguably the worst, one of the worst seasons we've seen an A-League club endure the season before, when they finished last and just had a horrific year. Richie Garcia was their coach last season, and they obviously really struggled, but Ruben Zagovic came in halfway through the season and continued into this year, and I think did a really, really solid job. And, they finished 9th, but basically up until that last round, they were in with a chance to finish in the top 6. They were performing really well at home. They set up a really good system, brought in some solid players. Mustafa Amini in the middle. They had Mark Beavers at the back. Ryan Williams was solid throughout the campaign as well. Keegan Jeličić was the shining light for them, the young attacking midfielder. There was a good sort of setup of players there at Perth Glory, and considering where they were, just a matter of months before, they certainly have turned things around and look like they are on the up. So for me, 6 out of 10 for Perth Glory. I think they had overall a decent campaign. We'll be aiming to jump into that top 6 next year. It was another disappointing season as well for Brisbane Roar. For me, they're coming in with a 5 out of 10 rating. Bit of an interesting one, but despite finishing that high on the ladder, I thought they were really, really poor for much of the season. You remember early on in the campaign, they actually had a really, really solid defense. The key thing for Brisbane, despite the fact that they were, struggling, is that they had one of the best defenses in the league. Tom Aldred, the captain at the back, was sort of really marshalling his troops to try and hold on. The issue for them was just that they didn't have a striker. I mean, losing Charlie Austin so early on in the campaign really derailed things for Warren Moon's side. Of course, Warren Moon ended up leaving the club towards the end of the season. Nick Green coming in as the interim did a decent job, won a handful of home games, but a really poor campaign overall for Brisbane Roar. Their finish in the ladder to finish 8th, I think it's not quite reflective of how poor their campaign was. Credit to them to finishing decently at the end there under Nick Green, but they need to sign some quality players next season, Brisbane, especially a striker. 5 out of 10 for me. And then just sitting outside the top 6 was Western United, which was maybe a bit of a surprise finish. Western creeping up there at the very end. For me, though, I'm giving them a 4 out of 10. Again, another relatively low rating. And that's simply because last year they were champions. They were champions of the A-League, and they were coming into the season once again with, similar to Melbourne Victory, pretty much the same squad, same coaching department. John Aloisi once again leading through the likes of, they had Alexander Prijovic, Leo Lacroix, Neil Kilkenny still there, Lockie Wales. This was a championship-winning squad. How did they fall so far? It's inexplicable. Again, just really struggling for consistency. They would have decent performances, decent patches of form here and there, but really struggled to just lock down, grab some wins and charge up the table. Again, towards the end, they're finished all right. Managed to just finish 3 points outside the top 6, but a really poor campaign from a team who won the championship just a matter of 12 months prior. For me, West United, 4 out of 10. Now it's time to talk about the teams in the top 6, and slotting in at 6th place is Wellington Phoenix, who once again had a really solid campaign, but faded out towards the end. They really struggled to win games there in the last couple of months of the season. I'm going for a 6 out of 10. When they were at their best, Wellington Phoenix, when the likes of Oscar Zawada, Božidar Krajev were sort of, in form, they were looking unstoppable. You could tell that, on their day, they could really beat anyone in the league. Once again playing at home, they were looking strong. 6 out of 10 for me, though. I think the way they really faded out, they're lucky that someone like Western or Perth or Brisbane didn't, grab a couple extra points throughout the season, because they easily could have slipped out at the end. The way they faded out was just really, really shocking. And it's going to be interesting to see what they do next season. No Ufuk Talay, maybe some more player departures. Wellington Phoenix, overall, pretty solid campaign, 6 out of 10. Just above them is Sydney FC, and this is maybe one of the ratings that we could sort of debate the most, and we'd love to hear your guys' thoughts in the comments. I've gone for a 7 out of 10, and I'll tell you what, it probably would have been lower, but the way they finished that finals campaign was really, really impressive. I mean, they were one game away from making the grand final. I mean, imagine what a season it would have been for the Sky Blues after what was such a mediocre year by their high standards. They were so close there. They won that first leg semi-final against Melbourne City, obviously crashed out in that second leg away, but they pulled through in the end with their experience. It was those experienced players, the likes of Wilkinson, Grant, Redmayne, Bratton, Lafondra, who pulled through at the end there and, allowed Sydney to finish in a decent spot on the ladder in 5th place, make a charge for the grand final. But just again, consistency. They really struggled at home. Back at Allianz Stadium, a lot of people were really excited, me included, to see Sydney FC back at their traditional home stadium, revamped home stadium, and just really struggled to get things going, which is a real shock, real disappointment for Sydney FC fans. Maybe a change, a bit of a new era for Sydney FC moving forward as well, with the likes of Lafondra leaving the club, Alex Wilkinson retiring. Overall, though, you got to say it's a pretty solid campaign for Sydney FC. They weren't terrible by any means. Pretty average, though, overall. But with that strong finish at the end, I'm giving them that 7 out of 10. Time to talk about the top 4 now. And this is where it gets really, really interesting, because all these teams who finished in the top 4 performed really, really well this season. First of all, Western Sydney Wanderers, who finished 4th. I'm giving them an 8 out of 10. Really solid from Wanderers. There were times this season where you thought, these guys are playing so well, they could easily finish top of the table. Whether they were, championship material was yet to be seen. But defensively was so good. The best defense this season. The combination of Tommy Michela and Marcelo at the back, fantastic. Lawrence Thomas in goals was superb. And the way they improved so much from the last few years, Marco Rudan, Wanderers, they finally built a competitive squad that could perform, not just look good on paper, but looked good on the field at times, many times throughout the season as well. Brandon Barella, of course, we have to mention him up top, one of the signings of the season this year in the A-League men's campaign. Wanderers, 8 out of 10, really solid, should be strong again next year. In third place, we have Adelaide United, one of the most exciting teams to watch in the A-League this season. Nestor Irankunda coming off the bench. Craig Goodwin, one of the best players that we've ever seen in A-League history, in my opinion. Just a fantastic squad, a really solid season. And towards the middle of the campaign, maybe around February, March, I think it was, maybe, they were coming close to knocking Melbourne City off the top and catching them in first place, which would have been a huge story. Adelaide just fading away towards the end there. Some losses to finish off the campaign allowed them to slip down the ladder, and Mariners jump ahead of them. Really good season though overall for Adelaide United, apart from some slip-ups here and there. Some mistakes in defence in some key games. Some question marks over the midfield. Whether Isaias is the right player to lead them going forward. Losing one day to that terrible injury was a big blow as well. But again, so many positives from this campaign for Adelaide United. What an exciting team, 8 out of 10. And then it's the top two, the two grand finalists. Coming in at second place, we had Central Coast Mariners. And this might be a bit of a controversial one, I'm not sure. But I'm going for 9 out of 10. Being a Mariners fan, some may have expected me to give them a 10 out of 10. But here's the simple thing for my rating, right? I think a team gets 10 out of 10 if they win both the premiership and the championship. That is pretty much a perfect season, right? Neither Mariners or Melbourne City did that. So for me, both of them, spoiler alert, get a 9 out of 10. So it goes Mariners, though. What a season. An incredible season. In my opinion, up there is one of the greatest Mariners seasons in our history. A campaign that took a little bit to get going. In those early rounds, we lost a few games. We lost to MACARTHUR at home. We lost to Perth Glory at home. But we turned things around massively in the second half of the season, barely losing any games in that final 10 rounds, and putting together some really good performances with the likes of Jason Cummings, Marco Tullio, Sammy Silvera performing fantastically well week in, week out. Brian Kautak at the back alongside Nectar Triantis. The list goes on. You could talk about everyone in this Mariners side, and of course we all know about that famous grand final, in which was just a fairy tale night for all Mariners fans. 9 out of 10 though. There isn't much to fault. Nick Montgomery, the coach, absolutely fantastic. For me, so close. They would have been 10 out of 10 if we jumped ahead and beat Melbourne City to the premiership. I'll take the championship any day of the week, though. 9 out of 10 for my Mariners. And it is, of course, a 9 out of 10 for Melbourne City as well, the reigning premiers, who really faded away in that grand final. I can see some argument to give them an 8 out of 10, but I think despite the way they faded out in the grand final so poorly, they were so dominant over the entire regular season. They were so good when you think of the gap that they had for basically the whole season, apart from when Adelaide almost caught them. They were so dominant, leading the way by 10, 12 points clear at the top of the ladder. In a salary-capped league, they just perform so well week in, week out. When players are missing, they've got other quality players to bring in, all over the park. It's just, it's depth and it's quality, and they were unstoppable throughout the regular season. The final series is where they came undone once again. Melbourne City, they have to fix that up. It shouldn't happen, don't get me wrong, that's unacceptable. That grand final loss was shocking and will be felt for a long time at that club. We're already seeing a lot of player changes at Melbourne City. Whether Rada Vidicic is there for next season, we'll have to wait and see. Some big concerns for Melbourne City after that grand final. But when you look at the whole season, we are talking about the whole season from the start, from October 2022 to the end of the campaign. You got to give Melbourne City a 9 out of 10, definitely losing a point for that grand final loss. If you want to drop your ratings in the comments down below, go ahead and do so. We'd love to see what you guys think of teams, whether it's just your team or other teams across the league. And hit like on the video if you have enjoyed and wanted to show your support. My name's Lockie. This is Coast Watch Football. See you guys in the next one. Cheers.